All right, good evening, everyone. May I say more than I've said with a lot recently. Welcome back. You know, give yourselves a round of applause. And all these things you forget after not hosting Cafe Sci for a year and a half, such as being blinded by the lights, and I can't actually see the familiar faces. Now, for those of you who haven't met me before, my name is John Willis, and I'll be your host this evening, and I'll be helping to host a few of these Cafe Scis through the year. Now, let me start. Let me be really upfront. Let me tell you what happened about half an hour ago. Okay, I got an email from this evening's speaker, Olaf Krigolson, and he emailed me and he said, "I'm really busy with errands, but don't worry, John. I'm going to be exactly there at the start time at 6:30 p.m." Okay. That was, I'd like to say that was my reaction as well, right? But just to let you know, okay, I'm going to talk to you for a little bit, but then I'm going to give you a little bit of extra time to enjoy your drinks and your meals because you haven't been out for a while, so take it slow, okay? Now, we've also got our live stream audience as well, so they're joining us. And so if you're watching on the live stream, go and make yourself an extra cup of tea or coffee, right? You've got the time. Get yourself comfy in your favorite armchair. So with that in mind, I've got a little bit of extra time to introduce this evening, right? I guess the other thing I should do first off the bat is to say a big thank you to Herman's for welcoming us back and doing such a great job. You know, there's a lot of things changing week on week at the moment, right? And they've been really good making sure everything can happen. And also for the folks who maybe didn't want to come out this evening, you still feel a little bit uncertain, the live stream is a great piece of technology that they've brought online for us. So I'm really pleased at the kind of service that we're offering. There's a few changes to Cafe Sci this year. Most of them are going to be seamless, but I wanted to let you just look under the hood a little bit. So it used to be, it was just myself and one other person organized these talks. And I felt that was starting to get a little bit old. Okay, so now what we've got is we've got a committee of about 6 or 7 people. And there's kind of 2 ideas in hosting Cafe Sci that way. First of all is, for the last 5 years, you've basically seen all the science I'm into, right? But you haven't really seen what other folks are into, right? This kind of thing. So it's one opportunity to actually bring in some new faces with some new connections across UVic. So you're hopefully going to see some talks that really span all the different science that's done across UVic. And I think that's a good thing. Secondly, it means you won't be seeing me every evening that there's a Cafe Sci. You'll finally get a break from all of these monologues, okay? And but secretly, it's kind of my retirement plan. Because I figured this way I can build a cohort of protégés who can then take over seamlessly in the future, and you'll still get these great talks with an experienced backup crew, this kind of thing. So that's kind of what we're hoping for. How many of you are regular enough to remember the T-shirt challenge? A couple of hands up. For those of you who don't remember it, I challenged myself a couple of years back to always wear a T-shirt that was themed to the speaker's presentation. Right? It was expensive, it was tough, and ultimately I decided it wasn't worth it, right? But I thought for our first one back, I hope you can admire this one, that I thought, it's nothing to do with the title of this evening's talk, but I just thought it was yeah. I like Bonnie Henry as well. So what I'm going to say now is, I've been going for 5 minutes, right? I'm going to wait for our speaker to turn up. Okay, I'm going to go and sit down now and enjoy my drink and maybe get some of my dinner as well. So all I'm asking for is a little bit of patience, and I'll come back up in about 20 minutes, hopefully, and introduce our speaker. And so if you're on the live stream, you don't have to do anything, okay? Just keep it logged on, go and make yourself that cup of tea or coffee, and come back ready for a start at approximately 6:30. So thanks for bearing with us, and I'll talk to you again in a little bit. Well, what do you know? We have a speaker. All right. So let me just say to the folks on live stream, it's time to come back into the room now. Please come back. So it gives me great pleasure, as I said, to start off our new season of Cafe Sci. Things will look a little bit different, but I hope a lot of things will look the same. One thing that's going to look the same is a year of great science conversations. Okay, we're starting this year with Olav Krigolson, and Olav and I go back a way because we used to host Café Scientifique together, right? So Olav has actually been there in the trenches, and he's given a number of talks for us, and I know you're in for a wonderful talk this evening. So Olav is actually a member of UVic's graduate program in neuroscience, which is part of our division of medical sciences. And the talk he's going to tell you this evening, it's actually something I think we probably all wanted to do over the past few weeks in one way or another. What if we could peer inside the human brain? What would we see in that Pandora's box? So with no further ado, thanks for bearing with us, and let's start our evening presentation. Thank you very much, Olav.
Thank you. And thanks for the introduction, John. Much appreciated, and it's nice to be back. In fact, after a year of teaching classes through a video camera, it's nice to stand in front of people and talk. I was actually just teaching this afternoon, standing there just happy, smiling, and the students, I think, all thought I was nuts. That's okay. And my apologies for being a little bit late. Back when my previous iteration of hosting and speaking for the cafe, we had a 6:30 start time. So I was sitting at home on the couch with my son. I'm a single dad most of the time. And we were having a grilled cheese sandwich, and I checked my email, and John said, "You know it's 6, right?" And I'm like, "Okay, let's go, bud, now." So anyway, my apologies. That's just my memory and going back to the past. So what I want to talk about tonight and tell you about is just, it's a kind of a combination of things that I've been working on for the past 5 or 6 years. Before I came back to the University of Victoria in 2014, I was a professor at Dalhousie on the East Coast in Halifax. And I miss it there, but I had a good 13-year-old reason to come back to the West Coast. And we were in the lab, and back when the, and I'm not trying to start an uproar with an election around the corner, but with the previous administration and running the country, there was a real push for people like me to do applied research. So stop doing basic science, and you want to do things that actually help people in the real world and help Canadian companies. So we started looking for what's called industrial partnership grants. And the idea was that my lab would essentially work for a company for a while. And actually the money was really good, and the grants were really easy to write, so I wasn't afraid of it. And there's another positive outcome, which is we have a lot of graduate students, and there's not a lot of positions in academia. So they need to find jobs after they get their PhDs, and going into industry is a really viable outcome for them. So I reached out to this company in Toronto called Interaxon, and they were making something called the Muse EEG headband. And they were saying it was an EEG system that you could buy for $250 at Best Buy, and you could measure your brain waves. Now, the purpose of the Muse was for mindfulness. The idea was that you would wear your Muse, and it would help you become more mindful, and they sell them that way. There's an app that goes on your phone, and away you go. I was looking at it with dollar signs, saying, okay, how much money are you going to give me to test your device? This is good. Some PhD students can eat dinner for a couple months, and away we go. So they sent me, not this is the new Muse. They sent me something that was a predecessor of this, and it looked a bit flimsy and plastic. And I remember sitting down with my PhD student at the time, Cameron Hassel, and saying, there's no way that heap of crap works. All right. So the goal is that we were going to put it head to head with our $100,000 EEG system. So we've got 3 research grade systems, the same as the ones you use in the hospital. And we were just going to have people measure their brain waves with one of these things, and then measure their brain waves with the big system and just see, do we get similar results? It was a pretty straightforward test. And we'd done the test. We had tested 60 people, and I was playing with the data a bit, and I went, see, Cam, I told you, it doesn't work. Look at that, that's complete crap. And he went through my programming code, and he said, Olav, you're an idiot. And I went, well, okay, fair enough. He's a senior PhD student. He can get away with it. So, but I'd made a mistake in the code. I just literally put a greater than, less than sign facing the wrong way. So what I was doing was throwing all the good data out and keeping the bad data. This is why I let my graduate students do most of the science. I just come out and give talks about their work. But when we fixed that, I remember hitting the button. We were just sitting in the lab, and we ran the analysis, and the waveforms, the EEG waveforms, came out looking exactly like we thought they should, like the big system. And I remember saying, Cam, this thing, I think it works. And he's like, it looks like it works. So we proceeded to stress test it, and just doing a bunch of different things to see what we could get out of the device. And it's a perfectly functional EEG system for $250. This one's actually $450. They've gone up in price because this one's soft and you can wear it while you sleep to monitor your sleep. But it led to a really good discussion. What can you do with this? Because when I went through grad school, to measure someone's brainwaves was a real pain. You had to put 64 electrodes on their head. It took about 45 minutes to an hour. It required a team of highly trained technical people. And here's this thing, and just, you can't really run it because with Cafe I don't have a screen, so I can turn it on, but you won't even know it's doing anything. But I'm ready to collect the EEG data right now. It runs from my iPhone, and I can measure my brain waves. And I said, this is a really cool technology. Like, there is a lot we can do with this, because 5 minutes, anywhere, anytime. So it led to a whole bunch of projects, and I'm going to take you through some of that in the next sort of bit of time. John, how much time do I have? I always forget. Another 5 minutes, right? Oh, okay, fair enough. We're here a long time then. Okay, so we first, after we validated it, we reached out to the company and sort of went, congratulations, you've made a nice piece of technology. We suggested some improvements, which they incorporated, and they made their second version, and off they were to the races. But we really started thinking, I said, and I was tired at the time. I was mentally fatigued. And I thought, mental fatigue's an interesting thing. People might want to know if people are tired. And you can imagine situations, pilots before they fly, doctors before they operate. So we thought, let's see if we can tackle cognitive fatigue. So there was a bunch of research that shows with brain waves you could measure cognitive fatigue. It's just, if you have a fatigue detection system that takes you an hour to put on and isn't portable, it's not very useful. But if you have a fatigue detection system that you can just slip on in a couple minutes and do it, it might have some value. And we knew that to be true, because by this point I'd moved back to Victoria, and Island Health was throwing some money at us saying, we'd really like to know if doctors and nurses are tired. And I said, we would like to know that too, so let's do this. So we built a fatigue detection system. And basically the way it works is pretty straightforward. You put the device on someone, they play a game on the phone. The reason we use a game, and when you think of game, you have to think of the 1980s video games, and not games like they are today. I don't know how many people play video games in the room, but it's a very simple game. It's just a circle that flashes on the screen. And we tell you there's a whole bunch of these circles, and we want you to count the green ones and ignore all the other circles. And when people do that, we get a brain response, because we've said, hey, this is important and we want you to count it. And what's interesting is that brain response is reduced when you're tired. So as you get mentally tired, your brain responds a little bit differently, and we're able to detect that difference. So our first study was actually in the clinical simulation room, and most of you haven't seen the clinical simulation room unless you happen to have been a medical student or been a doctor or taught in the medical program. But in the Jubilee Hospital, there's a room with robot patients, and the reason they're robot patients is they can simulate someone being sick. And what they do is they have the medical students do 12-hour shifts. So they basically do a simulated 12 hours of doing cases, and they can, it's just to get them used before they put them out with real people, right? It's just to give them some sort of an experience. So in our very first project, we put the Muse on medical students before they began their shift and at the end of their shift. And our logic was fairly straightforward. They're going to be tired after 12 hours of doing simulated patients. And lo and behold, that brainwave difference that we knew we'd see or was associated with cognitive fatigue, we saw. So we were able to see that these medical students were tired. And the cool part about it is our assessment was taking 6 minutes. So you could imagine the practicality of this, which is before they start their shift, they can do this assessment. And you might imagine if they start tired, then maybe you don't want to have them start the shift. Possibly a good idea. So we changed it up a bit, and we did a second project where we looked at actual doctors and nurses in the ER. So I had a research team in the ER at the Jubilee, at the back of the emergency room, and it was close enough that you could hear what was happening, and sometimes it was intense, and sometimes it wasn't. And the doctors and nurses were coming in basically throughout their shift, and so we could do this assessment. And lo and behold, you'd probably be surprised to learn that ER doctors and nurses are exhausted by the end of their shifts. Where it got really scary, though, and the point of the technology isn't that. The point of the technology was the doctors and nurses we saw that were mentally exhausted at the start of their shift. I remember chatting with one doctor who had basically had 2 hours off. He had done a long shift, he'd had 2 hours off, and he was starting another long shift. And you've got to ask yourself a simple question. Do you want that person operating on you? You know, probably not. So we believe the fatigue detection system works, and we've deployed it in a few other places. John's a lot like me in a lot of ways. Like, we both like it. He calls it adventure science, he mentioned earlier, where you get to travel around the world and do cool things. So I was speaking in Las Vegas at the Digital Health Summit at the Consumer Electronics Show, and I was talking about this research, and I've had a lot of people come up to me to ask me about it. But one group was from a mining corporation up in northern British Columbia, and they basically said, you know, fatigue's a big deal for us. And they said two things. They said, one, because people die. We have big equipment, there's explosions, it's a dangerous place. And they said, two, when those problems happen, we stop making money. So I took two of my graduate students up to north of Fort St. James. So if you've ever been up to that part of British Columbia, you're going up long dirt roads and there's nothing up there. And I actually learned a lot about BC on that trip, because I didn't know that in Fort St. James they have chicken racing. So we actually, a high point of the trip might have been stopping with the graduate students and going to Fort St. James itself and betting on the chickens. But we continued the drive up when we got to the mine. And this is, you know, it's kind of, if you're not familiar with heavy industry, these are these trucks that are massive. So the tires are far above the top of my head. In fact, the haul trucks, just for random trivia, carry 240 tons of ore every load, and they drive perpetually. So they're just in a circle. So the guy backs in, they fill it up full of ore, he takes off, and the next truck is going back in. And they just drive in a circle all day long for 12 hours. And then they basically, it's kind of like a NASCAR pit stop. They pull the truck off, they're basically fueling it and doing a quick check, and then the next person's in the truck and off they go. And the people working at the mine work 7 days on and 7 days off. And we were doing fatigue assessments. So we were set up at the mining safety office, and the crews would come in, and we would push them through our assessment to see if they were tired or not. And we did some common sense science. Lo and behold, people get tired at mines too. Surprising. What was interesting, though, was when I was analyzing that data set, I was again thinking, gosh, I must be bad at science because I've made a mistake here. And on a 7-day shift, what day do you think they're the tiredest or most tired? The third day. So it's actually the 7th day, not surprising. But the day when they're the day when they're the next most tired is what day of the week? It's the first. And yeah, it's the first, and the accident data in the mine corresponds with that. They have the most accidents on the last day of the 7-day shift, and then they have the second most accidents on the first. But I was staring at my computer screen I was checking the greater than, less than signs again, because I was sure I'd made a mistake. But but a different PhD student, Chad, said, no, Olav, you got it right this time. And so I reported this back to the mine and said, look, you did have some individuals that were more tired than others, so this is a viable tool that you could use. But I said, this one did puzzle me, and luckily they told me the accident date, otherwise I would have been afraid to share them the results. And I can tell you why the mining crews are most tired on the first day of the week. Because you can fly from Prince George straight to Las Vegas. So you are getting a bunch of young people making crazy amounts of money, and by crazy I mean crazy. We were sitting at the lunch table on the first day, and the guy said, you know, so they gave us $20,000 for the project, and he said, how'd you spend the money? And I said, well, I gave $10,000 to him and $10,000 to him, and that puts them on the project. And he looked at them and said, boys, $10,000 a week for $10,000 for 2 weeks, you're doing pretty good. Because that's how long the kids were at the mine. I drove them up there and left them. It wasn't that appealing of a place. And I started laughing, saying, no, that's their salary for 6 months. You've paid half a year's salary for these guys. And then he starts laughing and points to the janitor and says, that guy makes $140,000 a year. So they have these young people that make all this money, and they basically go party, and they come back to the mine to recover. So, because the mine is 100% dry, they get they basically get fed anything they want to eat. The food was fantastic, at least the mine we were at. They have exercise chambers, they have quiet, soundproof rooms. So they go to Las Vegas, and they're partying on the flight home, and they get on the bus and they sleep, and then they show up at work, and off they go, and of course they're tired and accidents happen. So we were doing fatigue quite well, and we started thinking about, you know, what are the other things we can tackle? Like, what are some other interesting problems we can look at? So we decided to take a look at baseball. This was driven largely by a graduate student in my lab at the time, Anthony Pluta. He's a coach here in town and been around the baseball scene for quite a while. And he'd asked a really quick question. He said, Olav, you used to play basketball back in the day. And I said, yeah, I played a bit of hoops. And he said, I played baseball. And he said, what do you think about the zone? Like, we always talk about athletes being in the zone. You know, that's a mental state. Can you detect, you know, something in the brain waves with these little mobile headbands that might possibly show you some information about whether someone's in the zone or not? And I thought, you know, this is the fun thing I love about my job. My graduate students pitch these crazy ideas, and I go, yep, let's do that. That sounds awesome. So we got ethics approval to test baseball players all around Victoria and Vancouver. And we started measuring EEG data before the guys and girls went up to bat. So we basically had the device on their head, and then we'd measure some brain waves, and then they'd go up and take a few swings. And it was really, really interesting, because we found that their batting performance correlated with a brainwave signal that we could measure. So we were able to predict with about 75% accuracy whether or not they were going to hit the ball with their brainwaves from before they even took a swing. And it's and this project's got a lot of appeal more than baseball. We're actually running the second phase of this right now at Speed Mechanics. The first time we evaluated baseball batting performance basically by having 3 expert coaches stand there and go, yeah, that's an 8, that's a 4. So it wasn't the best kind of data to have. But the second time we did it, Anthony has started this place, Speed Mechanics, out in Central Saanich, and they've got a very fancy system. So they've actually got a 3D camera system, so they can measure the speed of the ball off the bat, and they can measure all these mechanics so we can get a better thing. So we're running that right now, and we're actually doing it swing by swing. The first time we did it, we just sort of measured data for a couple minutes, and then they went out and took a bunch of swings, and we got this relationship. But now we're actually seeing that in an individual swing, the brain activity is different when they have success versus when they don't, which is pretty cool. And that's a sports application. You might think, okay, so professional baseball is going to love you. What else? We're also running this same project with academic tests. So I'm having students measuring their brain waves before they write exams. And lo and behold, their brain activity before they write an exam does have a relationship with how they do on the exam. So this whole other line of research is we've got it into performance prediction. And there's a lot of applications there, because again, you would want to know, if your doctor is tired before they operate on you, but you'd probably want to know if they're going to have a good day anyway in terms of performance. Like, is the surgeon doing surgery well today or not? Okay, because if they're having a bad day, personally, I would not want to opt in. I'd say, today possibly I'm not going to. Same with pilots. Today's going to be a bad day of flying. All right, I'll take a different plane. It's good. Just tried, yeah. So we got into the performance prediction business for a while, and we're still working with that. And we're looking for all sorts of things. I was just talking with someone at RBC the other day, because when they want to know, like, this is a big question for them. They said, if you could tell us if our investment guys are having good days or bad days, we'd be really curious about that. And I bank with RBC, so I say I'd be curious too. Actually, it would be good to know if they're going to hit a home run or not. No pun intended. And this has just opened more and more doors for us. So we do this. We can do all sorts of assessments with this. The one that might be of interest to a lot of people in the room is we're currently working with the Cognitive Health Initiative here in Victoria, and Dr. Alex Henry Bargava specifically, because a lot of us, as we get older, start to worry about things like Alzheimer's or dementia. And the problem with Alzheimer's and dementia is that disease onset can be 3 or 4 years before anyone really notices. People's brains start to fail them, but the problem is, if you know how Alzheimer's or dementia is diagnosed, it takes a while. First of all, there has to be symptoms, and then you have to get in to see a doctor, and then they'll put you through a series of paper and pen tests, which there's scores on them. If the scores are low, they think, well, maybe this is an issue. There's confounding problems like the fact that your memory begins to fail you as you get older, even if you don't have Alzheimer's or dementia. So the question that Alex and I were chatting about was, well, if we could put everyone through an MRI scanner, we would know who has Alzheimer's or dementia. It's pretty easy. I've worked on a project at UBC where we were looking at basically just the impact of exercise on aging brains, and you basically if you take an MRI scan, you can just see it. Like it's I could train everyone in this room to identify Alzheimer's or dementia on an MRI scan in about 5 minutes. It's pretty pronounced, the changes in the brain. The problem with this, of course, is we can't put everyone through the MRI scanner, right? Like, it's just impractical. If you've ever been on the wait list for an MRI here in Victoria, you know that it's a long wait list. And then if we decide we're going to scan everybody once a year, you've got a massive problem. So the idea was mobile EEG, same tech. Is there a difference in brainwave patterns when people have Alzheimer's or dementia relative to mild cognitive impairment, relative to just being a healthy brain? So this is quite an involved project. We were actually running it all through COVID. We never shut it down. We even had ads in the paper for a while trying to get people to volunteer. And we're doing a full MCI assessment, so we have medical staff on site, and they put you through a proper screening and all the stuff that they would normally do in the clinic. And then we get them to play, we get our participants to play games on the phone. So all of us is hinged on playing these games. They're all very simple games. And then we look at brain activity to see if there's a difference. And this data is literally hot off the press, and that this afternoon I was sitting there with the students working on the project, looking at it, and to the naked eye, it looks like there's a difference in brain activity between people with MCI versus people that have a healthy brain versus people with dementia. With dementia, it's pretty obvious, and we weren't surprised by that, but that was at mild cognitive impairment state. So mild cognitive impairment is when you're just starting to go down the road. And a lot of people get MCI, but they don't progress further. If you get dementia or Alzheimer's, then you're really going down. But with this, it was just seeing we could detect MCI, and it looks like we can. If my graduate students are doing what they're supposed to be doing on a Tuesday night, they're up in front of a computer doing statistics for me, so tomorrow morning I can come in and get an answer. But that research program, I think, could have a lot of impact. Because if you start thinking about it this way, we build apps. So what we do is we build the apps and we do the math, and that's what controls the device. So the headset itself is pretty dumb. These headsets, I was judge at a science fair before COVID, and a kid at my son's school had built an EEG system with spare parts from from an electronics store. It wasn't a very good EEG system, didn't have the heart to tell them that, but it was a functional EEG system. So the actual technology isn't really that involved. And the hard part's the math. So that's where we spend most of our time. So it's not as simple as eyeballing these things. You've got to write a lot of math to do this. And a lot of people, when they find out I'm a neuroscientist, are sort of surprised to realize that I spend most of my time in front of a computer writing computer code that's doing math to analyze brainwaves and look at different patterns of brainwaves. And there's a lot of buzzwords out there with this stuff, but you might have heard of machine learning. So machine learning is how you can get your phone to recognize your face, all right, and things like this, or voice recognition, but you could apply it to brainwaves. And another thing are called neural networks. So it's basically a computer simulation of what your brain's supposed to be doing. But the cool thing with these neural networks and this machine learning is we can train these things to recognize patterns. So just like they recognize the pattern of your face, for instance, they can recognize the patterns in the brainwaves. And right now it looks like we're having some success with that with MCI and versus control patients. And if you think about the device cost, $250. Most people have a cell phone, and I would love to say that I'm in it to get rich, but I became a professor, so clearly I'm not in it to get rich. I would have listened to my mom's advice and gone to medical school if that was my goal. But yeah, but if we give the software away for free, then everyone in this room for $250 could have an MCI test that they could do at home on a weekly basis, right? And it wouldn't be a diagnostic tool, but it would be a flag. A light goes off, and you can go to your doctor and say, hey, look, I've been tracking my brain activity with this thing. It's saying things have changed. So what we actually don't want to build as a diagnostic, we want to build a screening tool, if you will. And a screening tool that could be used then so that people would have this information. And this extends to fatigue as well. It extends for it even extends to performance, which these are all things that you could presumably measure anywhere at any time in a couple of minutes. And we've proven that point. One of the more extreme studies we did was I just keep thinking adventure science because it describes some of it. Basically, I took a research team to Mount Everest Base Camp because I was working with a guy from Calgary who was really interested in altitude sickness. And altitude sickness is a brain state, all right? Basically, when you talk to the Sherpas, it's really interesting because I have a really good friend now, Nima Sherpa, who is our Sherpa guide that basically took us up the Everest Trail to base camp. And then a couple of us went off and climbed a mountain with him for some fun, not Everest, but we've stayed friends. But his comment to me was, he said he's summited Everest 3 times. He said to me, the people that die on Everest are making poor decisions. That's why they die. He said most of them, what happens, the classic story is the Sherpa will say, go back. You need to turn around. It's over. You're not going to make it. And the person that spent the $70,000 or $80,000 to be there says, no, it's right there. I just want to keep going. So they die from making a poor decision. And lo and behold, that brainwave pattern we can see as well. When people have altitude sickness, that was one of the worst research studies I've been a part of because we deliberately induced ourselves with altitude sickness to just get our brains in a funky state so we could measure our brainwaves. And I actually remember one of the worst nights of my life was being up there, and I can't tell you anything about that night, and there was no alcohol involved. We were staying up at a place called Gorakshep, which is right near Everest Base Camp, and we had deliberately pushed ourselves up a very steep slope very quickly to see if we could get our brains in a fuzzy state. And I remember actually it was bad because we were doing O2 saturation, so you measure the saturation of your blood with oxygen, and typically, right now everyone's O2 sats in this room you'd hope would be in the very high 90s. Mine was down at 67, and I was kind of going, that's not good. Not quite. I should be, but that's for other things. But I know. But my students say it all the time. It's fine. But we could apply this same technology in this situation here. So altitude sickness, you can imagine, just like, currently I'm wearing something on my wrist that's detecting my heart rate and a few other things. And you could have this technology available to you where you can measure your brain waves anywhere at any time in just a couple of minutes. And those are, I'm not done yet. Those are some of the use cases. And just to give you a feeling for where this is going, since I got into this mobile space, EEG has gone everywhere. If you actually look on the Interaxon website, you can buy a pair of sunglasses that has an EEG system tucked into it. And they look pretty much like regular sunglasses. People are building EEG headsets into stereo headphones. So you're walking around with your headphones on, but there's an EEG system measuring your brain waves. In the ear, EEG is a thing now. They put the electrode inside your ear, and basically, a hat. I've seen hats with EEG systems. And then, of course, if you really want to get extreme, people are talking about EEG implants. So you could implant something in that's measuring your brain waves. But you can imagine why this might be valuable, right? There's all these use cases where if we develop the right math, we can do this. And I gave this as a different talk, but I'll steal a bit of it here. This is how I got to go to Mars. So I was showing off the technology to a friend of mine, Kim. Her brother Gord is one of my best friends in the world. And she, by just random luck, happens to be a NASA research scientist at the University of Hawaii who's in charge of the Mars habitat there. And she said, this is a massive problem, right? They want to send the astronauts to Mars. It's going to be a three-year mission, a year to get there, a year on the surface, a year to get back. And NASA is terrified of this. Because when they sent people to the moon or when they're on the ISS, they have real-time communication. They're in constant contact with them. They're streaming down their heart, their blood pressure, their heart rate, all of this stuff. They know the exact condition their astronauts are in. And the Mars thing terrifies them because they don't have control. And the reality of these situations is this actually is more of a fatigue problem than anything else, but people are going to get fatigued, they're going to get depressed, and they're going to have changes in brain states. And having worked with NASA now for a couple of years, the official gold standard for fatigue assessment at NASA is, are you too tired to do this? And if you've watched any movies about astronauts or astronaut types, they never say no. All right, they never say no. They always say yes. No, I'm good to go. I'm good to go. That's the phrase. And so NASA's really curious about this. So we basically put in a grant saying, look, we've developed this technological capability. We think this solves the problem that you've got identified. Because you can actually go on the NASA website, and if you hunt around and find the research tab, you'll see the big list of grant calls they have. They have this long list of, can you solve this problem, all right? And that's because they outsource a lot of this stuff because there's far more scientists in the world than there is working for NASA. So they came back to us and said, okay, we've published a few papers, got it. Do you want to go lock yourself in the Mars habitat for a week to show us that this works? And I was kind of going, yes, I do. I told my mom I was going to be an astronaut. At 51, it's highly unlikely I'll ever be an astronaut, barring getting rich and buying my way into space on SpaceX or something. So this counts. So we got to spend a week inside the Mars habitat. It's an interesting place. It's considerably smaller than this room. It's considerably smaller. It's about 40 feet across, maybe 45. And it's actually not built to look like a spaceship. It's just built to space requirements. So the people at the NASA site in Hawaii basically said, well, how much space can we have? And then the people at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, we got out the calculators and said, we can give you 44 square feet of space on the surface of Mars. That's what you're getting. So they designed the habitat to meet this space requirement. And they take these simulations really seriously. I kind of thought that we were going to go there and, we'd be playing around inside the hab and having some fun. And I pictured myself down on the beach in the evenings having a Mai Tai and surfing in the mornings and then going back to work as an astronaut. And that's not quite how they do it. They locked us in, and they said, anytime you leave, you have to request permission to leave, and you have to be wearing a spacesuit. We went, okay, that's kind of cool. But I can tell you that wearing a spacesuit on Mars sounds really cool. Wearing a spacesuit in Hawaii, all right, in a lava field is not nearly as cool. So we were in full simulation for the week. It was the real deal. Every morning we got up and we exercised. We lived off of freeze-dried food, and not the gourmet meals you get at Mech for camping. It was Costco brand freeze-dried stuff. So we had a massive freeze-dried tub of flour and tomato sauce and you name it. And we had one copy of The Joy of Cooking. So the actual high point of the week became the cooking challenge, was who could get voted the best freeze-dried meal. And it was actually my PhD student, Chad, won, because he managed to come up with freeze-dried pizza from scratch with no ingredients. Yeah, I was upset because I thought my freeze-dried brownies were the hit, but I was outvoted at the end of it all. But and then you do missions all day. So you basically you get because that's what happens on Mars. They have a guidebook that says today you need to go out and do this and do that. So they actually have the astronaut crews that are there explore the volcanic field, because that's what they'd be doing on the surface of Mars. Most of the trip to Mars will be geology. So you crawl around in lava tubes and explore the volcano, and that, again, is not a fun thing to do. It's very hot and nasty, and lava is not fun to walk across. That's all I learned on that. And then we did our science. So morning, noon, and night, we'd put on the headsets and do our fatigue assessment. And lo and behold, not surprising, kind of reminds me of the mind story. If you do 7 16-hour days in a row, by the end of it, you're exhausted. So our brain scores dropped away, and we basically, by the end of the week, were completely shattered. Now, the astronauts would never work at that pace. They would have some downtime, but much like we tried to get altitude sickness, we also were trying to get ourselves exhausted, and we managed to do so. So the cool part about that is, well, I think we can all agree COVID ruined everything, but I am getting to go back to lock myself in the Mars habitat for a month at some point, because NASA's decided that before they put this into space, they want to be really sure. But I figure being in a bubble in Hawaii for a month, you can't really complain too much. So that project's moving ahead, and it shows like a really cool application of the technology. The only thing bad about that week, well, there's a couple bad things, but I mentioned this in my TED Talk, but one of the things I learned about space travel is, they say they can't hear you in outer space, and they can't hear you in outer space. That's true, but they can smell you from a mile away. And the reason they can is we got 60 seconds a day of water to shower after 5 hours of exercise. And showering in 60 seconds, I just encourage, if you want to feel like an astronaut, go home tonight and have a 60-second shower. There's your experience. You usually come out with soap still on you, and if you add in the exercise, it's very hard to get rid of 5 hours or 6 hours of sweat in 60 seconds. So by the end of that week, it wasn't a pleasant experience, because the spaceship to get you to and from the ham is a van. So after doing that all week, they locked us in a van for a 3-hour drive, and by the time we got out of that, it was pretty real. So yeah, the technology is there. It's everywhere around us, and it's coming. I have a former student who is working in the EEG wing for Apple. She won't tell me what she's doing. I'm smart enough to know that if she works in a thing called the EEG wing, and she has a PhD doing EEG, she's probably working on an Apple EEG device, is my guess. And Google has a similar wing doing their thing. And of course, Mark Zuckerberg, the person that's just trying to destroy the world through Facebook, got up famously on stage a couple years ago and said, "Wouldn't it be great if Facebook could read your mind?" All right, and I think that's the worst idea I've ever heard. But if the big companies get into it, this tech's going to become mainstream. And it already is in some sectors. Video games is a place where it's coming out. There's a couple video game companies that have released EEG systems built into headsets. And one of the cooler ones I was looking at the other day can tell where you're looking. So they know where you're looking on the screen just by looking at differences in your brain activity. And then that way, if they know where you're looking, then they can use that in the game. So they can use that to trigger events in the game. So that's sort of the story. There's this mobile technology that's out there using brainwaves, and there's actually some new ones coming on. There's a new technology called near-infrared spectroscopy. We just got our first pair of glasses. They built it into a pair of glasses for a company called Blueberry in Toronto, and basically they fire infrared beams into your brain, and completely non-invasive. It doesn't hurt or anything like that, but they can actually look at the way the light reflects off the oxygen, the deoxyhemoglobin, the deoxyhemoglobin in your blood, and you can measure cognitive activity that way. So that you can actually, we are playing around with it today and just doing math problems, and you can see differences in brain activity when you're doing 2 + 2 is 4 versus if you're doing the square root of, say, 1,028. So there's all these other technologies that are expanding out there. So the reality is, and I always want to leave some time for questions, is that we do have the ability to peer inside someone's brain in a couple minutes, and it's completely real. You know, I can go home tonight and evaluate how well I thought my talk went by looking at my brainwaves. Can't go that far, but I always wanted to wear it during a talk, but then I thought that's a bad idea. I don't want to know. And it really what it is the tech's out there, and it's people like me and the students in my lab and my colleagues around the world that are developing the mathematical algorithms that decode the brain signals and add meaning to them. And I can finish with one more example, which is my first honor student, Kyle. First honor student I ever had. He's a professor at the University of Alberta. He just published a paper where in 3 minutes, I think he's trying to beat me in time. We do 5 minutes and he's doing 3 minutes. I think he's blatantly showing off. But they were predicting stroke severity. So they could do an assessment in a hospital and tell whether someone had a mild, medium, or severe stroke in 3 minutes. And they're batting about 84% accuracy, which isn't bad. So as we get better at this, our accuracy rates will grow up and the technology improves. So in terms of current barriers, which might be a place to finish, is the limitations we have is these systems are good, but they're not great. So the data is comparable to our $100,000 system, but it's not as good as our $100,000 system. So we need the technology to improve a bit more. But the rest of it's just a big math problem. And it's just applying, looking for the patterns using mathematical algorithms as opposed to the human eyeball. Because when I started doing this, we did it very simply. And I can tell you that. When I started my PhD back in 2003, the way we analyze the data has changed so much since then. And we were able to see so much more in there that we're all just going to be able to solve more and more problems as we go along. Anyway, that's the mobile EEG story and how you can peer inside a brain in a couple of minutes, see what's going on. As the tradition of the cafe, we have a really good question and answer session. So now that my son is with my ex-wife, I am happy to stand up here for as long as you want and talk about the technology and answer any other questions. So anyway, thank you so much for listening tonight. Sorry I was a little bit late, and happy to field your questions. All right, right there. But bump. You're hired. You can give the next cafe talk. Yeah. So the question was, in light of our dementia work, have we applied it to MS? We haven't. The biggest problem we have right now is well, John probably does better than I do, but the state of research funding in Canada is not outstanding. And I have more problems than I have students. So we have a list of projects, and actually my college basketball coach has MS, so he was asking me this exact problem. And Phil Old from the University of Victoria, if you know who Phil is, he's a bit of a legend around here, at least in the basketball community. But he, yes, we can probably do something. It's just getting the money to do the projects. That's the real problem. It's sort of our bottleneck. People hear some of these stories and think that if you saw my lab, you'd see this $1 million Star Trek futuristic thing. I was over getting refurbished computers today from surplus because we lost a computer and I couldn't afford to buy one. So I was going to break out a refurb to replace it. So yeah, funding's a bit tight. The graduate students live off very little money. on average. And then there's just not a lot of money in Canada for this stuff. But yes, it's potential. Yeah, question here, I guess, right here. Yep. Excellent. A comment there was about Apple hearing aids. I actually haven't heard about those, but they sound really cool. Excellent. There was a question at the back I saw. Yeah, the ethics of this is really interesting. So the question was, we always repeat the questions at the cafe, as you know. The question was the sort of the thinking about, the mine worker experience with the headband, which is maybe I should make different life choices, versus the mine's point of view, which is, should we not pay them today? So I can tell you some of the stories that speak to this. Some of our funding for our doctor study here came from the doctors themselves, because the doctors in the emergency room would be the first ones to tell you that they want more doctors. And it's just a budget problem, right? So the interest groups in these things have different things. The mine people have considered for a while paying their workers just for a day of rest at the camp. So just literally saying, come home a day early and you get a bonus, and just rest and then go back to work. So in extreme cases, you could imagine, just like if a pilot would blow over on a breathalyzer, they're not going to let you fly. In fact, you'll probably go to jail. You could imagine down checking a pilot. So we have talked about the ethics. I try to stay out of that side. I just try to say, look, we'll solve problems and let other people argue. And there's an extreme end to this, which is, if you have all these brainwave data sets floating around, what if you identify a problem a person didn't even know they had? So MS would be an interesting example, right? Which is, what if you figure out someone has MS, and then do you take away their driver's license, and they didn't even know they were sick, because you're convinced they have a medical condition? So there's a lot of talk around neuroethics, and when you get this kind of data, what are the responsibilities, and who owns it, and how does it work? So it will happen, and the discussion's ongoing. Question right here in the middle. Can you detect criminal activity? We haven't tried, but I'll tell you about a really cool story. There is a group in Germany that basically, they're still using MRI scans. So most people know what an MRI scan is, which is when they go in and take a picture of your joints or something like this. Functional magnetic resonance imaging is when they add an extra head coil, so you can measure, essentially you're measuring blood flow in the brain, and from that you can infer neural activity. What they did is they were showing pictures of places that you had been and places you had not been, and they could differentiate whether you'd been to that place or not. So the discussion we had around this was actually with a colleague of mine at UVic, Dr. Stephen Lindsay, who's big into eyewitness testimony. He said, well, you've got the ultimate criminal detector here, because if the criminal's brain says he's been in the crime scene and he's saying he hasn't been in the crime scene, it's gotcha, right? So people are working on that. And similarly, I have a good friend, Alona Feisch, who is sadly now at the University of Alberta, but was at UVic for a couple of years. And we just published a paper where we were detecting words. So we just were showing people words on the screen, and we were able to separate from the EEG signal with about 80% accuracy which word they were looking at a given point in time. So this idea of mind reading, or seeing what's there, people are looking at it, and it will probably come. Right now the technology is quite limited, and it's really a technological limitation, but as the technology improves and the math improves, it's a tackleable problem. So detecting criminal activity, yeah, I believe you could at some point. Yes, right here in the front.
Right now, our current situation is identify that rather large group of people.
The people who are not thinking rationally about COVID self-identify.
The question was, given the current COVID crisis, could we detect who is thinking rationally versus who's not thinking rationally? Again, I'll, as opposed to offering an opinion on that, I'll keep it grounded in science. My PhD student, current PhD student, Chad, just published a paper. So some of you may be familiar with the work of Daniel Kahneman. He's a Nobel Prize winning. He's sort of a jack of all trades, but a lot of his background work was in economics. And he published a book called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. And thinking fast is when you're making gut hunch decisions. So if I say 2 + 2 is, and you say 4, that's an example of a fast decision, or just any time you just make that sort of heuristic decision with your gut to do something. And thinking slow is when you think analytically. So you logically or rationally go through that thing. And Chad was able to successfully separate those brain states. So we were able to, and that he was at about 98% accuracy. It worked really well. So we were able to separate fast and slow decisions. And we're actually currently doing that with medical doctors. And the reason being is that the medical community, I can say this because my boss in the neuroscience graduate program is a guy named Bruce Wright, who's both a medical doctor and an academic. The belief is that medical doctors, what they do is they start their careers thinking analytically, but through experience they rely more on gut hunches. That's actually not a problem, because those gut hunches are grounded in years of experience. But what they want is to know that they've made a gut hunch decision, so that you could fact check it, just backstop it yourself, and say, hey, maybe I should apply some analytics here. And Chad's work suggests we can do that. So there you be. Question right here at the front.
Yes, thinking fast. Can you take that and look at it from what decisions are made? Some people will come to a conclusion very quickly. Other people will mull it over for a period of time. Does it affect the decision and the quality of the decision made?
Yeah, so the question was, when people make decisions, if I got this right, some people think when they make a fast decision, some people are slower, and could you look at the quality of the decision, I guess. We haven't gone there yet. Chad's work has been pretty much just, can you separate these different decision states? So we do it with a range of tasks. We actually use a task that simulates diagnosing medical cases. So we actually teach first-year students how to diagnose different types of liver disease, and they learn that by analyzing it's a pattern recognition problem. When you get tested for these things, there's things like AST levels, ALT levels, and those levels basically are different for different types of cases. So we actually train first years to be able to identify these patterns, and we do it in about an hour, and then we test them. So when they make a fast decision, it's one that's really easy to do. The numbers are so obvious that it's this. And then when they make a hard decision, the numbers are closer together, and it's hard for them to separate different things. So, but we haven't really looked at the quality of the decision yet. It's a really interesting issue. And this is kind of what I mean. There's just so many things we could do. But Chad's on the case. He's interested in this stuff. One day he'll have his own lab. So he might go after that particular issue, but we haven't yet. Question over here, yes.
Yeah, in the case of your fatigue testing with all the different groups, did you find that there was a small amount of people that could handle the, say, 12 or 15 hours with very little fatigue? And in the case of the doctors of the Jubilee, would you mind sharing the names?
Yes. Funnily enough, I was teaching about human research ethics this afternoon. The question was with the fatigue study. Was there a subset of people that can handle the fatigue well? Having read a lot about fatigue over the past couple of years, what I can tell you is that the literature would suggest that there is a subset of people that think they can handle the shift. And within that, there's a very small subset of people that can do it. And these are problems you can train for, in a sense, but everyone hits a breaking point. So the example, one of the groups we've talked a bit with was a U.S. Special Forces group, and when they train for fatigue, like if you talk of Navy SEALs or these kind of people, basically they can run at a pretty high level of what's called operational intensity, but for a very short period of time, and then they just go down hard and they rest. I think what's happening to our medical personnel from the conversations from the people I can't mention is that they're just not getting the downtime to recover. They're just working too much continually. And with COVID, obviously, that's adding a pressure to that. I have a friend of mine, Lindsay, she's a nurse here in town, and she's been working basically without break for months. I can tell, like you can just tell. But yeah, so a lot of the groups we talk to, so the mind's a good example. It's the opposite of island health. They would happily spend more money to not have the mind stop. And it was kind of weird. In the control room, they have a money counter. And there's literally this big digital thing on the wall, and it's going up all the time, and that's the dollars coming in. When that thing stops, they get really excited. Question right here. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm really interested in dementia and Alzheimer's, and not which is which, because both are pretty serious. And I really love the idea that this EEG equipment app could actually get in early on that, because I know so many people that slip by. And I was married to somebody for a very long time who had dementia, and I had no idea. I was with him 24/7. He was so beautiful to me. I had no idea he had dementia until one day we were at the doctor's office and they asked him to draw 11 o'clock, and he couldn't do it. And I was so shocked. He was an engineer, a brilliant mind, a brilliant life, a beautiful man. And he died without being diagnosed with dementia. But I know at that moment, it was just before he went into like his demise. And I just had no clue. So I really think that this is one area in particular that would really benefit the world, because there's a lot of early onset dementia. And I don't know the triggers or anything, but I know we live in a very much more stressful world. Yeah. And I know that stress is a part of this dementia or Alzheimer's.
Yeah, it's one of the projects where we definitely focused on. We during the pandemic, most of our research operations were shut down, at least the human research. But that one, given the importance of it, we were allowed to keep it running. Speaking of which, if anyone wants to be a part of that study, if you email my last name, but lab, L-A-B, so Krigolson Lab at gmail.com.
Is that two names or one name?
It's just one name, Krigolson Lab at either at gmail.com or at uvic.ca. We are still actively testing and recruiting. We pay your parking, we pay you to be there, and you'll get a medical assessment in addition to the EEG scans. It takes about 2 hours. You do have to come to the university campus, which is a bit of a zoo right now with our 22,000 students, I heard back. But yeah.
I would love to come, because I notice myself, I get a little nervous because I start searching for words I've always known. And it really scares me that I'm doing that. But I have a very busy life, you know.
Yeah, and don't remember what I said. Memory loss in these things as we get older is normal. So every time I do my dementia and aging talk, because I've got to talk just on that, I can see myself scaring the audience. But you have to remember that most of us experience these things naturally. But yeah, it's a high priority project for us. Alex and I are both currently seeking funding for it right now because we want to expand it. So our preliminary data looks good. And I am part of the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging. It was on the paper a while back, and we got a group of us across the country were awarded $27 million by the federal government to pursue that. Now, admittedly, that's getting divided among probably 14 universities and 15 labs, but that does mean this work is getting funded and will continue.
That pays for the parking, right?
$27 million worth of parking.
Unfortunately, it's just one more. Well, we've actually got two here, and so okay. Well,
So how do you know if dementia? I'm going to do these really quick. How do you know if dementia sets in? Well, if you use our tech, presumably the app would tell you to go see a doctor. Currently, that's not the way it works. But yeah, currently it's a doctor diagnosis. Frankly, usually too late. That's the problem. I don't have an answer for you because sadly I don't work for Island Health.
On my best behavior with the doctor.
There's that too. Ma'am, right here, you were a patient and had a question? Oh, the longitudinal study's still going. They basically have brought me in because they want to add mobile EEG to the CLSA. So it's something that's coming in the near future.
I'm sorry to cut you all off. It's the worst of my responsibilities. So, Olaf, you were asking, whether you'd given a good talk or not. I think we've got our response, right? You touched.
Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, John.
Yeah. You touched so many areas and so well. And I will say as well, this is a talk I've seen once or twice before. It's all new every time. You bring in so many wonderful new aspects.
Well, the person I would like to thank is not a person; it's people. The Krigolson lab, I've got a lot of students like working with me, so I've mentioned a bunch of them, but I've had 3 amazing PhDs. My PhD student Cam Hassel's now a postdoc at Oxford in England. Chad and Tom are currently running projects for me. I've got an army of master's students, and we rely on a legion of undergraduate volunteers to do all this stuff. So I hope and then I've got colleagues around the world that help with this stuff. So we've got a lot of projects on the go, with the caveat being when we can find the money to run them.
Well, we'll give Olav a round of applause in just a moment. Let me just finish with a couple of comments to you. First of all, I don't know about you guys, I've missed this. This was cool. Unfortunately, we're not going to do it next week. My speaker pulled out. Yeah, she had some issues. She's not going to be able to make it, unfortunately. I try and work miracles, but on that kind of timescale, I'm a little bit pushed. So we're not going to have something next week. It's better to sort of be upfront about that rather than keep you guys guessing. We will be back in October. We will have 2 more talks back to back, 2nd and 3rd Tuesday of October. I'm going to email you probably in the next couple of days about that. They'll be in person and live stream again. So I hope to see you all. I hope you've enjoyed this evening. And with that slightly unfortunate note, let's return to the better option of thanking Olaf for a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thanks again, everyone.